Welcome back to the Earth Dawn Survival Guide podcast, a podcast for novices and masters alike. I am Dan, and of course my co-host is the legendary now line developer Josh Harrison.
Legendary, geez. Okay.
Well, you were telling me just off the air you were immortalized on social media at the moment, and being turned into a horror by your other cohort at FASA. So Josh is now legendary. So. Yeah.
So if people aren't aware of what we're talking about, we're actually recording this on Halloween night. And today's sort of social media thing, I guess it is now, we've done it twice, so that makes it a tradition at FASA Games to stat up a member of the staff as a horror. Last year we did Ross Babcock, and this year I was the target. And Morgan actually wrote up a very accurate and cool description and power set for me as a horror. And it's on his blog and on the FASA Facebook and Twitter feeds. And tomorrow it will be showing up on the front page of the site as the weekly sort of developer blog release. So So track those down, check it out.
Yeah, because when this podcast comes out a week or so from now, it'll be part of the history, I guess. So furthermore, on the podcast, we'll be discussing all things Earth Dawn magical and mechanical, and in this case, geographical. Otherwise, if you have any questions, you can provide us some feedback, and we'll get to some feedback in just a minute. But feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And this episode, we're going to cover some of the listener emails we got. We actually got 2 in the past week or so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is great for a start. It's nice to know that we're not kind of just talking out into the void, that there are actually people listening.
I have a personal note to add to both of these. The emails that we got, I'm one of 4 boys. My mom had 4 boys, but 2 have since died. And one was named Matt, one was named Andy, and our emails are from a Matt and an Andy. So just needed to point that out. They're in the void talking to me.
My wife's cousins are siblings named Matt and Andy.
Yeah. So it's all come full circle. So
they are relatively common names. My brother's named Andy.
So. Yeah. So there you have it. But it's just one of those things. It hit me there. So we got about 11 questions on our first email. So we're going to run through these as fast as possible, not to dismiss them, but sometimes we're going to hold these for a later episode. So question 1 was on illusions. We will hold that for a future episode.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to illusionists.
Yes. 2 is for any future products. Is there anything in development?
So as of this recording, we have just released the PDF version of the Adept's Journey Mystic Paths, which is the latest source book. It's one that provides 4th edition rules for several of the previous racial disciplines and stuff like that, bringing them into the sort of rules context that we created through Questors, one of the earlier books.
Yeah.
It also reworks the shaman discipline as a full-blown discipline and introduces a new discipline called the Gauntlet, which is a combat discipline focused on unarmed combat, but also one that relies on endurance and strength as opposed to speed.
Cool. I look forward to that one, especially.
Yeah, and there's 12 paths, including the Horror Stalker and the Windmaster and the Tail Dancer, some of the classics, and then there are a couple of new ones as well. So
nice.
Check that out. The files for the printer are going to be going off probably tomorrow. I'm going to be sending those over, and then we'll have the print book be produced, and hopefully, knock on wood, see that print version distributed in December, probably.
Oh, cool. I will be getting mine on PDF tomorrow, just because I haven't had time to download it today, and then I'll be getting mine in the mail. So looking forward to that. Anything else after that?
Well, the last page, the next to last page in the Mystic Paths book, in fact, does tease our next product, which
cool.
is a source book dedicated on the city of Iopos and the
Nice.
Denerastus clan. So we're really going to try and get an exploration of sort of the one of the primary bad guys of the setting.
Cool.
That is in development and is sort of in final edits and revisions, and hopefully we'll be kickstarting that, if not the end of this year, very early next
Q1
to get that, first quarter to get that out in PDF and print. And then we've got other stuff, but we'll talk about those another time.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. Question 3. Will something like the Earth Dawn Journal ever show up again? I actually hunted down most of those on eBay because I bought the first 4 and then my local game store didn't carry them anymore, so I had to hunt them down on eBay after the fact. But I did finally collect them all. I liked them.
Yeah, they're a mix of stuff, as you're going to see with any kind of fan project.
Yeah.
I've got some of them in print. I don't have all of them. I basically got the ones that came in at our local store.
Yeah.
This actually was a question that came up during the panel we did at Gen Con, which I have not finished processing the audio on to release.
Gotcha.
And it's something that if somebody wants to start something like that, we're kind of willing to offer support, but we don't have the resources to devote to something like that right now.
No,
So.
fair. It was a fan magazine, and any fan is welcome to publish anything they want. Whether it's sanctioned by FASA or not is a different thing. So,
I mean, if you're looking for sanctioning, absolutely talk to us. If we don't have to do a lot of work for it, we are more than happy to support things that spread the corruption.
all the better. So, will anything like the adventure Blades be published again?
There is nothing currently planned like that. In one sense, I'm not quite sure exactly what he's referring to. If he's talking about an adventure collection, because we talked about this last week, actually.
Yes.
If you're talking about an adventure collection that focuses on a magic item and exploring the histories and the backgrounds of that, there is nothing currently planned. If you're looking for something that is kind of like a series, a collection of adventures that's an ongoing story, actually our Legends of Barsaive series is that to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 5 chapters out so far. Chapter 6 is just waiting for the final bits of layout. Chapter 7, I'm working on art selection for that right now. I just finished up the cover actually over the weekend. So like we have that going on. But no, something like Blades in particular, like an adventure focused on a magic item, there's nothing currently planned, but who knows what could change there.
Never rule it out. Will there be anything like shards or shorter adventures?
Well, that's again, the Legends of Barsaive series is probably the closest thing on that, because each of those was originally conceived as a single session convention adventure.
Gotcha.
And so each chapter of that is generally like planned to run 3 to 4 hours. And each adventure can more or less stand on its own, but over the course of the various adventures, it kind of does shift into an ongoing story.
Gotcha. So you can string them together if you want to.
Yep. And then I've got like half a dozen in like convention scenarios that I've run. I talked about one in an earlier episode with the orcs, like Romeo and Juliet orc story.
Yes.
Where I've got those, and if I can at some point find the time to actually write those up, I'd like to see those released as a kind of shard-like thing to just give people adventures to play with.
Oh yeah, get them started with. And 3 to 4 hours from my group, we always call it a one-nighter, is always 2 to 3 nights because my group never stays on task. But that's just me.
And that's cool. Like, I mean, that's one of the things that you can do with a canned adventure is you can flesh it out. And, when you're doing it for a convention demo, those slots are a little bit harder.
Yeah, they're
in terms of a time limit. So you kind of
timed.
need to try and be on task, and people who are playing in them generally recognize that. But there is, I mean, the Legends games are set primarily in and around Haven. And so there are plenty of NPCs and stuff like that that you can use to flesh out and expand beyond a single session if you want to.
Gotcha. Fair. The next few questions kind of all run in together. They're all very brief questions. So I think he's asking about anything in development for Thera, dragons, or campaign level plots, like shards or ideas. So,
I mean,
I just lumped all three of those together.
Yeah. Thera, right now, because of the status quo of Barsaive as of the 4th edition book, we're working primarily, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, developing Iopos and the Dinarastis, because they're kind of the bad guys. The dragons, of course, are always a presence, and we're, anything that we're developing, we're trying to sort of figure out how they might be involved in what's going on. Thera, we haven't talked about it a lot, although they will be players to a certain extent in some of the books that we're developing, which are set outside of Barsaive. To kind of get back to the original question, there is a Vasgothia book that's in development that's going to expand that more. There is a Crayana book that is in development that's going to expand more on the information that was presented in the old Theran Empire source book. And so obviously Thera is going to play a little bit of a part in those. We are now, I think, stable enough in what we're doing that we are starting to look at longer term plot and story development for Barsaive as a setting and how to sort of piece that out over the next few books that we're going to release.
Very cool. I like the path that this is taking. So hope that satisfies the questions there. One longer question is, are there any more ties to Shadowrun? Because this gentleman also listens to Shadowrun podcasts, and we used to be in a shared universe, just separate timelines separated by thousands of years. And since I think Shadowrun is now owned by, is it Catalyst Game Labs?
Shadowrun is owned actually technically by Topps, that is the baseball card people.
Right.
Catalyst licenses the RPG from them.
Okay.
And is basically in charge of deciding all of the stuff that happens in it. The relationship between Shadowrun and Earthdawn at this point is complicated. And we could probably do like an entire hour just talking about that. Basically...
We won't, but we could.
We won't, but to try and summarize it as quickly as possible, at this point, there is no obligation at any point for Catalyst to pay attention to what we are doing, and we have no obligation to maintain stuff to hold that continuity to Shadowrun. Like, there's nothing, for example, that would prevent us if we wanted to, and I don't want to, but we could, say, kill Mountain Shadow, who is Dunkelzahn in the Shadowrun portion of the timeline. There is, like, we could, if we wanted to, kill him off, and that would be completely up to us, and it wouldn't necessarily throw anything out of whack. Basically, you've got stuff in both games that is IP to those games, and so those connections are, in one sense, always going to exist, but there's no longer any real coordination or planning for stuff that we do in Earthdawn to show up as a major plot point in Shadowrun.
Gotcha.
Like, a recent Shadowrun release did kind of bring up, they're not calling them the horrors, I think they're calling them something else, but basically the horrors kind of returning as a looming threat kind of situation.
Gotcha.
And there are some freelancers who write both for Earthdawn and Shadowrun. And so there are little Easter eggs where stuff will show up. Stuff that's referenced or was created for Earthdawn will show up as a reference in Shadowrun. So you might still see stuff like that, but there's no longer any large-scale coordination between them.
Fair enough.
I mean, if people want to have the connections, that's great. That's awesome. It's part of what drew me to the game in the first place.
Yes.
But yeah, it's
were I a
it's
freelancer for
complicated.
both, I'd be doing the same thing, planting Easter eggs there. So that takes care of that question. We've got one more that I think is just: would we like to answer any questions that are popping up on the forums? I think those answers are going to be on the forums, so we'll just leave them there, right?
Okay. So yeah, there was some discussion that was actually going on this morning on our Discord channel that I actually made some notes about because I think it would be actually a really good topic for us to address at one point. And that was when you are like creating characters and the sort of build approach, and as a GM, like what sort of balance considerations were thought of when we were kind of creating 4th edition, and just like addressing some of those as, hey, here are the things that we were talking about. Here's what the mechanics kind of imply and what you can do with that.
Nice.
I think it would be something that would be really cool actually to talk
or
about at some point
just a
in the future.
podcast unto itself.
But that would be a whole long
It would
segment.
take a long time. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, if there are questions that people have, they are free to shoot them our way. And there may be things that, as we're talking about specific topics, if there are common questions that come up related to them, we might address them as part of, the discussion. But we have plenty of material to go over without needing to necessarily go back to old forum threads to dredge up questions and stuff. If something occurs to us, great. But it's if somebody really wants a question answered here on the show, then send us
last
an
question
email.
from
And,
Matt
we'll
is:
see what we can
do you allow? I'm assuming he means either FOSSA or just Earth Dawn. Do you allow fans to submit material? Enough said. All right.
Yes. To expand on that slightly more, we're certainly always willing to entertain pitches if somebody has something that they really want to work on. And it may be that if somebody has a certain idea, it might not be something we're looking for right now, but we're always looking for people to sort of help fill our stable of freelancers. And so even if, say, your pet project isn't something that can be addressed right away, we might find space for you on something else if you can demonstrate that you can write and follow,
which is how I got on the podcast.
Editorial direction. So, yeah. Shoot us in general, shoot me, any of the other staff, like, even if it's just initially to like ping me on social media sometime and I can get you more specific info.
Because, hey, I was a big fan and I answered the open call for writers and I actually got to submit essays to Josh. So, yeah.
Yeah. You do it for the love, not for the money. I mean, you can make literally tens of dollars.
So to answer anybody's question as to how Josh picked me, that's how he picked me. He actually read my writing, was decent enough. I got printed in one of the books. My name is in there. And then he liked me enough and we're doing a podcast together. So to answer that question, why Dan? Now you know why Dan. Other than that, the other email addressed one thing about our sound quality. We'll get that taken care of as much as we possibly can. So basically his only question is, can we re-record the player pitch, the elevator pitch about Earth Dawn into a separate episode just so he can play that for anybody he wants to sell the game on?
Yes.
So like a 5-minute podcast episode, here's your elevator pitch, have them listen to it, go away. Or come in.
He also linked to an example of the sort of thing that he was thinking of, I think, from something. I haven't watched it yet, but he linked like a YouTube video for a Dark Sun thing that he does. I think that is a great idea. And I do have some thoughts about actually a video addendum video appendix to this podcast, where if there are things that actually would really be suited to having a video thing, like actually one of the things we're going to be talking about today, I think would work really well with a video going along with it. That those are ideas. So yeah, it is absolutely a great idea, and we'll take it under consideration.
And if anybody is more up on video
release date or anything
production than we are, by all means contact us, because that is out of my realm of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, mine would basically be like, I can cobble something together in iMovie, pretty easily. It's just that the two projects that I have sort of wanted to do on video, one is like a 10-minute like mechanics thing, and that requires a little bit of planning and prep in advance.
Yeah.
The other one is the pronunciation guide, which we're going to talk about later. And that one, I think, would really do well with just having, as the audio is playing, have the actual word like come up on the screen so you can see.
A visual representation of the word.
What word it is. I thought that a video thing with that. And that just requires me making like a bunch of, effectively PowerPoint slides to pop up on the screen at the appropriate time.
Kind of like
but generally it's easier to do that if you have the audio
lyrics
ahead of
videos
time.
You can go find on YouTube for the new favorite song you just listened to. What are they talking about? And you can actually go see the lyrics pop up and hear them say it at the same time. Would be fantastic. And again, a little beyond my capabilities of video production. So we go from there. Otherwise, okay. So that takes care of our listener emails. Thank you both, Matthew and Andrew, for emailing us. We appreciate it. Anybody else, feel free. We'll talk about you. We'll use your name. You can hear yourselves be talked about and occasionally laughed at. I'm kidding. We didn't laugh at you at all. So otherwise, into our regular agenda, we have a broad stroke kind of overview of the timeline for the Game of Earth Dawn. We're going to break it up into like 3 or 4 different episodes. So today is everything we can hit on the high points for what happened pre-Scourge. So how would you like to start? Because it's kind of a lot of history to roll up into 2 or 3 or 5 minutes. I did a cram session on my end, just kind of looking over the timeline and highlighting parts of the paragraphs, because I have literally forgotten more about the timeline than most other people have learned over the last 26 years I've been playing this game. So, I did a little brushing up for my own sake. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess you just sort of need to pick a point and start from there. I don't have my 4th edition. I actually don't have my 4th edition book.
I've actually got the timeline in my hand.
So I started on that.
Going with the paragraphs. If you're following along in the car or at home, please don't follow along in the car. Don't grab your book while you're driving. The timeline is approximately 400 years before the founding of Thrall. The first record of the settlement is of what is now Vivane, and then it jumps to way back.
Okay. So you're going
machine.
from the actual timeline.
Yes.
Interesting bit of trivia. That timeline is
good.
Mostly my work. I actually did the original version that I'm aware of. I did like the original version of the timeline, basically by going through the old 1st edition books, because I did this for one of the very early incarnations of my website, and like went through the various books and like made a spreadsheet with the different dates and then kind of arranged them. So that ended up getting used for, I think it was the 3rd edition.
Yeah,
book
either
the
classic or 3rd edition, same
started
thing.
Appearing in it, and most of that was mine. So so you're looking at the actual. Yeah, you're looking at the actual timeline, whereas I've got my 1st edition book open here, where it's got like its pages of history with the various headings. So, yeah, the reference to the settlement at Vivane is something that came from the Vivane box set, I assume.
Yeah, I've
where it
skimmed that one
a little bit of the history there.
long time ago. Haven't broken out the box set on that one in forever and a day.
Yeah.
So otherwise the paragraphs for 4th edition begin with the separation of Shosara and the Elven court breaking with the Shosarans once they learned that they were humans and not elves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so. I mean, that is in many ways the history of Barsaive is the result of the history of the elves, with the Elven court. And this gets examined a little bit more extensively in the Elven Nations book, as well as the old Bloodwood source book. But basically, the court at Wormwood, as it was still Wormwood at the time, was the center of Elven culture and defined largely what it meant to be an elf for the Elven nations in other parts of the world. At one point, it was discovered that the elves of Shosara, which is an area far to the north of Barsaive, up in up basically on the coast of the White Sea, with present-day White Sea, were, because the traditional elven designs for ships were not designed for open water, really. They basically, and especially the sort of rougher water that you're going to get in the kind of Arctic Circle type of environment, that the elves of Shosara basically borrowed some aspects of ship design from the humans that lived nearby, kind of making a hybrid. And the more traditionalist elves had a problem with that. And basically it became kind of a political thing. And so the queen at the time was going to travel up to Shosara to see the people and find out and like talk to them and sort of make a decision based on that. And if I'm recalling correctly, and on the way there, apparently, supposedly got attacked by or approached by the great dragon Alamaze. And Alamaze basically said, the Wormwood is named after me. You owe me your fealty. And the queen said,
which is not
no.
fully
And
explained
so the
in the
dragon
paragraphs, leading it to more of an assume your own position as to why the dragon attacked and so forth and so on. So,
yeah, there are a couple of different versions of what it was, but basically the elves version of the story is the dragon showed up, demanded that the queen turn control of the wood over to him, and the queen said no, and so the dragon killed her. And that only one person survived to tell the tale or something to that effect. One of the things you actually may notice with a lot of the history here is that there's a lot of, and only one person survived to tell the tale, which, if you think about it, raises some interesting questions about this. Anyway, in the wake of this, there was a little bit of a period of time where there wasn't a queen of the elves, and then a new queen showed up and basically said, Shosara is no longer elven, and they were cutting them off from actually being an elven nation. And that was a controversial position in some respects. And one of the higher ranking members of the court, Elionar Messias, also known as the Martyr Scholar, basically spoke out against it. The queen banished him for, I think it was a year and a day, or until he could
declared
learn
he might
to
return when he learned the value of heritage
or something
and
to
quiet
that effect.
tongue.
So basically that he said he could return when he'd learned his lesson, and he left and never returned. He ended up at, again, this is according to the story, and maybe we'll address this a little bit here later, but he traveled south and ended up at a monastery in the Dalaris Mountains, which are in sort of the southwestern portion of Barsaive, at a temple or shrine or monastery, choose your poison for that.
You are correct.
Dedicated to...
Dalaris Mountains, dedicated to
was
Minbruge,
it dedicated to Minbruge?
Passion of knowledge.
Okay. And basically there was a group of scholars who were, doing learning stuff. And sort of that's where he ended up. Then, in the course of his hanging out with them, came across one of the things that was notable about this monastery was apparently they had a trove of really, really old books. And among them were these books that nobody had been able to translate yet, but they were super apparently old and super apparently important because of reasons that are never made quite clear. But Messias recognized them for what they might be and set to work translating them.
Yes.
And these are the Books of Harrow is what they became known as, which were basically the books presumably that basically told the story of magic rising and falling in its cycles, and how at the high point of the cycle, the horrors would be coming and there would be no way to stop them. Messias translated, actually, I don't think, according to the story, I think basically what happened is one night, like they came in and found Messias was dead, and like he had taken out his own eyes and thrown them in the fire, and all that was left were the books and a note from him saying, these are the Books of Harrow. They are, in fact, I think I know the quote here even without reading it. These are the Books of Harrow. They are our doom and our salvation. Learn from them or we all perish. Yeah. And yes, they're very evocative. That same night, something stalked the halls of the monastery and killed a whole bunch of people.
What? Who does that?
The only survivor... this popped up again. The only survivor was Messias's apprentice.
Yes.
This is Kiros Navarim. Who I think him and maybe one or two other people took the books and fled even further south to an island in the Celestrian Sea. At this point now, we are actually well outside of Barsaive. And there, they basically decided to set up a remote place to study these books and find out what it was that Messias, who became known as the Martyr Scholar because he died for the knowledge, was trying to warn people about. And that settlement was called Neresham.
No, Center of the Mind.
Which means...
Center of the Mind.
It was at Center of... Yeah, right. And basically, at that point, they started reaching out to learned folk across the known world to come and try and study these things and find out what's going on. And this basically was the beginning of what would eventually become the Theran Empire. I will. Now I've been talking for a bit, so now I will turn over the narration. Close to the
end before we get to the Scourge, because yes, they changed the name of the city because at this point they needed to create an army to protect them, and they had envoys out to Landis and Utrecht and Thrall and other powers in the area, and so they happily agreed to help protect Thera for their growing influence on the wealth and the cultivation and the influence, because they had the answers in these Books of Harrow, and they were beginning to spread the information that this is coming, there's no way to stop it, and they were either believed and joined forces with, or not believed, and those people decided to make their own path and figure out, maybe we don't want to believe this, because it's too hard to believe. It's 800 years from now. If I were to tell you anything was going to happen...
Yeah, I was going to say, keep in mind that this bit of news about, with the translation of the first book of Harrow, which was actually a little, when that was announced a little while after the founding of Neresham, that they were saying, yes, the horrors are coming. It will be several centuries before they arrive, and people in general, even the long-lived elves, tend to not really care so much about stuff that far down the line. So even if people believed them, they believed that there was plenty of time. I mean, even, we're talking about, if we're talking about 700 or 800 years, the number of generations of people between now and then, it's just, it's the equivalent of if somebody in...
Yes.
12 or 1300 AD, in sort of at the height of the, sort of Black Plague, Middle Ages era was making predictions about
Yes.
what would be going on in the world here in the early 21st century. Like, even if they were right about it, what would the people of the time have, like, what would their reaction have been? And so it is completely understandable in some respects that people, for the most part, are like, oh, that's cool. Even if I believe you, like, not even my grandchildren's grandchildren are going to be facing this. So we've got plenty of time to figure stuff out. In the meantime, I'm going to sell you stuff and sell and make money and, like, just kind of get on with life.
And go about my usual day. Yeah, it's this prediction that's hanging out there. It's like a Nostradamus quatrain that he put out. Even he knew that he would be scrutinized for them and wrote them in code because the church at the time didn't like them. And so he had to disguise their true meaning and write them in French and Latin and I forget the other language he wrote them in off the top of my head. Someone will correct me on that one. And I know someone will correct me on the language that Nostradamus used. But either way, we're talking hundreds of years in the future, and nobody's really going to believe them because it's so far out that, to your point, my children's grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren may not ever come across this thing. So it's too far out to even worry about the consequences of it happening today. But 400 years after the founding of Neresham, is it Kiaros? Navarim?
Kiros, yeah. Kiros,
okay. I was saying that wrong. Kiros Navarim finally died of old age, which, after all this investigation, I'm surprised the Books of Hero didn't actually kill him too. But he died of actual old age, and they preserved his body in amber. In, like, what, a sarcophagus or Han Solo frozen in carbonite type thing?
I don't know, something like that. I imagine that it's similar to the, like, Lenin tomb in Moscow, where he's
hermetically sealed.
Yeah, kind of like on display for the public.
Fair. Okay, we'll go with that. So at this point, they had figured out finally how to use the elements and construct cities out of true earth and true air and true fire and true water to replenish the water sources underground and the cares. And that's how they're going to keep everything fresh and not stale after hundreds of years that they would need to be buried underground. But they started getting a little bit too big for their britches. They wanted to, so they asked a lot of other areas around them, Utrecht and Throl and Landis, and asked for all the orichalcum they could possibly find.
Right, because and this was largely before a lot of other nations and powers had come to really accept the fact that the Scourge was coming. I mean, at this point, you sort of still had just the very early appearances of some of the horror precursors, like the Invi or insect spirits, some other sort of early, like, dark spirits and whatnot that would be causing problems. But still, a lot of places were still looking, it's still, a few hundred years down the road, we've got time. So yeah. Thera, because it was basically founded on the knowledge contained in these books and believed what was going on, because it was the thing around which their entire society was effectively built, started gathering orichalcum, which is a highly magical metal that takes enchantment very easily. And, the more powerful and extensive and long-lasting you want an enchantment to be, the more of it you're going to want. And so they basically started getting it from wherever they could.
Yes. And it's made up of the the five elements: air, earth, fire, water, and wood, all put together into one metal.
Right.
But because they were so, I can't say greedy, but they knew they needed it, and so they started paying everybody they possibly could for it. This led to the Orichalcum Wars because the trolls of the Twilight Peaks just couldn't absolutely resist going after this prize, because they're based on if you can take it, you do.
Right.
And if you are strong enough to protect it, then you should. So they're there to test that theory on the orichalcum shipments.
Yep. And they interrupted a shipment that was bound for Thera. And basically they sort of triggered a a trade war of sorts that basically broke into open conflict between the various nations as they started to realize that there is only so much orichalcum, and it's extremely valuable, and everybody wants it either to sell it to the Therans in exchange for knowledge of how to construct the cares, or to just profit off of it, on its own. Is eventually causing all of this disruption led the Theran Empire to basically dramatically put a stop to it. By which they flew out the behemoth, which is in denial of all potential reality, basically a huge castle flying on a massive chunk of rock, floating through the air in precisely the way that bricks don't, to borrow a phrase from Douglas Adams.
It's Adams, absolutely.
And proceeded to bombard the slopes of the Twilight Peaks and all of the, villages and homes and women and children of the Trollmoots, just basically bombing the bejesus out of them.
Fireballs,
basically
magical energy.
Yeah, and the ship was so powerful and was accompanied by a not insignificant fleet of warships that despite their best efforts, the Trollmoots were not able to really do much of anything to it, and so the only way for them was to basically surrender, starting in a way another long-running enmity between Thera and other powers. And basically the Therans said, now do what we tell you, basically addressing this to the other nations, do what we tell you or we will do the same to you. Basically at that point officially establishing Thera as an empire and a military might and not people to be trifled with.
Yes, because the battle against the trolls was known as the Battle of Skypoint, and the foundation of that city comes a little bit later. And then 100 days later, they actually declared themselves an empire, and I think also declared that Parlainth would be the capital of Barsaive.
Yeah, but Barsaive was going to be the first. Yeah, Barsaive was the first official province of the Theran Empire, and they declared that they would build their capital there, and decided that the dwarves of Thrall would be the sort of provincial administrators for them.
Yes. So, hey, we're powerful enough. We're just going to annex you and make you our first nation state.
Yeah.
Welcome to Thera. And there you go. And then pretty much the last little thing before the Scourge actually happened is people were kind of getting tired of Thera's demanding their demands, period, either for the orichalcum or so much in trade they couldn't possibly survive afterwards, just for the knowledge on how to build the cares and survive, that they reached out to the dragons instead.
Right.
For some aid and some knowledge.
Yeah, because the dragons are ancient and powerful beings, and if the books of Harrow are to be believed, which nobody at that point had any reason not to, given what had been going on, that the dragons must have knowledge, they must have weathered a previous scourge, and so therefore they must have knowledge that would have allowed them to survive. So some people went and approached the dragons to try and help them rather than Thera. Thera, at that point being an empire and interested in controlling things and making profit off of the provinces that they were conquering, didn't like the dragons cutting into their business, and so basically started a campaign by which they were attacking dragons, and with the might of the behemoths and similar large magical airships, were doing a reasonable job of keeping the dragons from any kind of large-scale interference. And the dragons, in a rather decisive move, kind of put a stop to it in their own way, wherein agents of the dragons basically infiltrated Great Thera, the city that's at the heart of the empire, and assassinated several very highly placed members of the Theran Empire, especially ones that had been profiting off of the conflicts with the dragons. And basically, it ended up being okay, we won't mess with you, you don't mess with us. And, that was kind of where it was left. And the dragon said, sorry, we're not going to go broadly giving away our secrets. And that was that. There is so much, and we'll have to do a more in-depth, here's what's really going on behind the scenes of the whole like story going back to even before the separation of Shosara and the dragons and the elves and Thera and like all of what's kind of secretly going on in the background, and how knowing that really shapes how you look at the conflicts and the history and politics of Barsaive as a whole.
So Game of Thrones, eat your heart out.
I wouldn't say that.
I
don't, well, I mean, anyway.
Yeah, no, Game of Thrones is hugely political. But no, I think that covers, because right after that is when the actual, as they call it, the long night begins, and the Scourge takes over for its 400-year run. And
that conflict with the dragons was basically the last time at which there was any kind of real, challenge potentially to Thera's dominance over the world. And that, I mean, there's like lesser details and stuff, and maybe when we get into the next section of history, we can talk about some of the stuff that, for example, since Barsaive is the focus, that Thrall was doing in the lead up to the Scourge, and talk about that, and then the early the early years after the Scourge. Because there is some important stuff that plays into why things are the way they are. But yeah, I think that gets us that gives us the broad strokes of how the Theran Empire came to be, and the significant events that basically hit the high points of their growth as an empire, and stuff like that.
Yeah, we only missed one thing, which due to a technical difficulty we talked about earlier and had to go record again. That is that Thera was so busy and so building and using everybody they possibly could and everything they possibly could to get their cares built, that they co-opted this means of indentured servitude for those to work off eventually the
cost of the rights of protection and passage, which was the proper name for the wards and the care designs and whatnot.
Yes. And that transitioned into
basically slavery.
Yes.
And so
the
Theran
Empire,
not
just for orcs,
and not just for orcs. The orc slavery thing is actually a much older legend. I mean, the orcs were certainly strongly affected by the Theran Empire's slavery, but the Therans were equal opportunity slavers. They would accept anyone. There really wasn't a lot of true racial animus, at least as it's presented by them, when it comes to slavery. But the orcs suffered it perhaps the worst because of their racial and cultural history with slavery going back to before, because a lot of this history involves the nation of Carafad. So the orcs were already free and sort of had a nation at that point, which had been founded by their break from previous slavery. So we're kind of looking at that there. But yeah, the slavery of the Theran Empire is sort of a key point that plays into future developments, and why they are, in some respects, more or less universally viewed as bad guys, certainly at least from a Barsaivian perspective.
Oh, totally. So we've covered most the history up until the Scourge, and I think next episode we'll get to history of the Scourge and only the Scourge, and what happened underground. So do we want to hit some Barsaivian...
Yeah, we've done a little bit
on the map.
We've done a little bit of history. Let's do a little bit of geography. This is our social studies episode.
Exactly. So we'll do some geography here. So basically, the main points. Oddly enough, I live in Colorado, and I think that the Barsaivian map. I know it's not based on anything in the United States, but just part of it. I look at it and go, well, the capital's kind of where the capital of Colorado is, up there in the upper right-hand corner ish, and then we've got some. Mountains kind of all over the place, and so it reminds me of the state I live in, but it always has. However, depends upon the map you look at as to how far south and east and west it goes, but I love the fact that we've got active volcanic emissions at all times. We've got this the Death Sea going on. We have an actual open sea, the Eris Sea there. So if you'd like to travel by water, I love the waterways, and I love the fact that they all run in different directions. So you got east to west, you get north and south.
Yeah,
and
you've got sort of the dominant waterway of Barsaive is the Serpent River, which kind of, if you try to apply like real world hydrology to it, doesn't make a lot of sense. But that basically it kind of starts up in the northwestern corner of the province, kind of runs easterly for the most part, about 2/3 of the way across the province, then takes a bend kind of south for a little bit, and then bends back towards the west and flows kind of southwest down to the southwest corner. So it kind of makes this big, broad U shape through the province, eventually emptying out into Death's Sea, which is a big, massive volcanic, gigantic sea of lava that supposedly is the prison of death, hence its name in southwestern Barsaive. And then on top of that, you've got a major tributary, or a major other river of the Serpent called of the network called the Coil River, which kind of starts up in central Barsaive, fed by springs from the Thrall Mountains. And a little bit probably from the southern slopes of the Thailand Mountains, though those end, I think, more flowing down towards into the Servos River system. But the Coil River basically runs from the Thrall Mountains, kind of from around the center of the province, geographically speaking, southeasterly. It crosses the Serpent at Lake Ban and then continues southeast, where it ends up flowing out into the Eris Sea, which is sort of in the southeastern corner, sort of the southeastern boundary of Barsaive as you look at it on the map. And realistically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that you would have two rivers that come together like that and then flow out in two different directions. Like having two rivers come together to form a big lake makes a lot of sense, but generally there would be one outflow, and this one has two, and it's more, I think, done to allow a good bit of like river travel to be able to take you to most places in the province within a reasonable amount of time. And like, if people weren't aware, Barsaive and the map of Barsaive is basically set in Ukraine and the area sort of around the Black and Caspian Seas.
Yes.
And the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov are fairly obvious as the Scarlet Sea and Death Sea, just by their very distinctive geographical shape.
Agreed.
But there is a lot of stuff about the geography of the area that is loosely based on the real world features, but I think the people who try to do a like one-to-one correspondence and stuff are getting a little bit too nitpicky and specific. And there are aspects of it's a fantasy game. Everything like is scaled a lot, in some senses is scaled a lot larger than it would be in reality, and stuff like that. And it's cool. And the connections are sort of there for the people who want to take advantage of it, and you don't have to.
No.
But yeah, like there are aspects of it that if you really think about it, don't make a whole lot of real sense. But that's fine. It's the Age of Legend. It's fantasy. You can have like weird, unusual stuff that's going on. So
well, and if when Shadowrun and Earth Dawn were linked, and Shadowrun is the near future, 2075 now or something like that, always 50 years out, and then Earth Dawn is thousands of years ago.
Right.
You've got all kinds of geographical things that can take place and reshape this: volcanoes, plate tectonics, floods, whatever.
Yeah, but so, even with that,
take it with a grain of salt.
Basically the big hand wavium is to say that the magic changed things in ways that science cannot adequately explain.
Yes.
Which is fine, and I love that, and I have no problem with it. So you just kind of go with it from there, and rather than looking at it, this could go into a whole other like rant subject that I want to try and avoid right now. But basically, living in our present day society as we do, where we have GPS and like massive amounts of easily accessible information and like video and audio recordings and all these sorts of fantastic modern conveniences and creations, there is a certain mindset that arises from that when you try to apply that to a medieval, Bronze Age, Iron Age, like, for lack of a better term, more primitive society that does not have these things.
Yes.
Like, basically, you can't really take the map of Barsaive and make it one-to-one with, like, present-day geography, not only because it wasn't really intended to do so, but because mapping technology, even with magic, even with some of the stuff that people can do, just was not capable of the level of detail that we have today. Like, the kind of things that you need to look at is you need to look at the way that maps were drawn in the early days of the Age of Exploration, or even before that, where you get to a certain, like, maybe around your specific area, you've got reasonably good detail, but the further out that you get and the larger scale the map is, the more fuzzy things are.
I agree.
And so there's, like, there's a lot of leeway and a lot of ability to just mess with things, and that the maps that you find that people make are going to approximate things, but are not going to, like, MapQuest take you, from the gates of Thrall to Travar and, land you within 100 yards of your destination without any trouble.
No, and the scale is off on open plains and how big a jungle might be, or a forest, or, wormwood or bloodwood, for Pete's sake, because if you take a look at it, and like we said before, almost everything in Earth Dawn is written from a first-person perspective, including the maps.
Right.
Because you won't find two maps that look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. The position of Bloodwood is a little bit more east in the 4th edition map than it would be in the 1st edition, where it was up in the left-hand corner and almost at the edge of the Barsaive map, and now it's kind of in the dead center, middle north. And so, depending upon the map you look at, as to who made it, and I don't mean the human behind it, the game. I mean in the game itself.
In the game itself,
yeah. Which character created that map for you to use is entirely what you're going to get. If you go to a vendor and you're looking for geographical maps to go exploring with, or you're going to find 3 or 4 different versions of it, and so you have to kind of decide with the vendor.
Yeah, and they may be broadly similar, but when you're looking at something on the provincial scale, there's not going to be detail. Like, it's going to show you where the big stuff is, and you'll kind of have to go from there. And that's
what I appreciate.
Yeah. And so it's a mindset that is in some ways alien to our modern day. And I like it. Yeah. I think it's cool, but people come to it with an expectation that is not appropriate to what was kind of possible at the time, even with magic and the skills of troubadours and stuff like that. So yeah, we haven't even really we talked about the Serpent River. You've got some like the Thrall Mountains kind of in the very middle, roughly speaking, of the province, where the Kingdom of Thrall, which is it's the Dwarven kingdom, the largest care that survived the Scourge, and the seat in many ways of political power, even if they don't necessarily project that power militarily. There was a lot of cultural influence from the Kingdom of Thrall that we'll get into in later episodes. You've got several significant cities. You've got Travar. You've got
Parlanthe.
Well, Parlanthe being largely a ruin at this point, and we'll have to devote an entire section to that.
We are.
Kratos, Europa, Jairus, Iopos. Those are sort of the big ones. You've got Vivane and Skypoint down in the technically not in Barsaive, but down on the very southwestern edge of things.
Corner of the map, yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got sort of the Serpent River we talked about, some other smaller mountain ranges. You've got the Servos jungle, which is basically this huge jungle in the heart of Barsaive.
Yeah, kind of like the Amazon jungle.
Yeah, I mean it's basically sort of the equivalent of that. You've got Death's Sea, which we've mentioned, which is the big sort of lava flow in the lava lake in the southwestern corner of things.
And then we've got the wastes and the mist swamps.
Yeah, the mist swamps, which is basically where the Serpent River feeds into Death Sea, and so the water gets warmer and puts a lot of steam into the air. You've got the wastes, which are the western border, basically make up the western border of Barsaive. It was an area that before the Scourge was very rich agriculturally, and had a lot of rich woodland and so forth, and it suffered very badly at the hands of the horrors during the Scourge. And there is an area called the Poison Forest on the edge of it, where basically everything in it is in a perpetual state of dying. As a result of this mysterious ash that is kind of blown in on the prevailing winds from the wastes into Barsaive.
Yeah. So you've got plenty of terrain. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then there's sort of a counterpart of it, the Badlands, which is sort of in the southern area near the city of Travar, which likewise was a very agriculturally rich area that apparently suffered very badly and is apparently growing in size, and nobody's quite sure how to slow or reverse this, and it's potentially threatening the safety and the existence of the city of Travar.
Yeah. So basically just on territory alone, there's, I think, the only thing we're missing really is a desert in Barsaive, sandy desert.
Yeah, I mean, like there's no true like sandy desert a la the Sahara or something like that. You do like the Badlands are very like American Southwest desert, very rocky and dry and whatnot. So you do have that kind of environment. You've got the jungle, you've got grasslands and plains, you've got mountains, including some very high mountains that get up into mountains like perpetual galore. Snow. Yeah, mountains galore. River, lots of waterways and so forth. So so there is a lot of territory and a lot of different settings and places that you can have your adventures.
Yeah, so my suggestion for survival guide for any game master is make sure you take into account the terrain your party is in and describe that as much as possible. If it's wet and sticky and hot and your clothes are sticking to the characters' backs and so forth, make sure to include those, because where they're traveling, if it's the open plains, make sure it's tall grasses and things and the sun is out and shining. Yeah, that's it. So be very aware of the terrain when you're running your game.
Yep. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Barsaive is in many ways very strongly what's sometimes called a points of light campaign setting, which is to say that you've got a map that's actually got a lot of sort of open, undefined space and a few bright points of civilization.
Yes.
And it doesn't, like, there are major trade routes and stuff, most of them following the rivers fairly closely, but that connect sort of the major settlements, but it doesn't you don't have to go too far off the beaten path to find places that maybe people have not been for centuries.
Yes.
Even though the game is sort of set about 100 years after the Scourge, there's a lot of cares that are still sealed, potentially. There's a lot of opportunity, if that's the kind of thing that you're into, for exploration and discovering. Like, basically, there is, like, you can drop ruins of towns or cities or castles. Cities maybe not quite so much, but larger towns and castles and villages and stuff like that, you can drop those ruins anywhere for any reason. Just set it half a day travel off of a major, like off of a trade route or, something like that. And so there is plenty of space to drop in your own creations, in order to flesh that out and do what you want. And, again, as long as you're sort of keeping in mind what the general terrain is so that you can create that to fit that, then that's great. And in another sense, because there are so many potential ruins and abandoned places as a result of the Scourge, there are lots of places for bad guys to set up lairs in a repurposed abandoned temple or old watchtower that is crumbling or something along those lines. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that you can feel free to create and drop in wherever.
Oh, totally. And I love the game for that. So that transitions us into the last few minutes or so, because we're going to tack on a legend from the original first edition Legends of Earth Dawn, Legends of Barsaive, at the end of this. So I recorded it earlier. We're just going to tack it on after the music. So hang on for 4 minutes after that. You'll have a nice little treat that you can use in game if you want to. Between then and now, we've only got one last thing to cover on today's agenda, which is the keywords and how to pronounce them, because you and I always wanted to do a proper pronunciation guide. So I grabbed 85 of the most common things in there, and I just tacked one on at the end that I thought about it, because it's a creature that I looked at and said, that's an Old English creature, and it actually has a pronunciation that I've never gotten right until just the last year or so. Which parts do you want to cover first? Or you want me to say them and you want to correct me if I'm getting them wrong, or how do you want to do it?
Why don't we, you can go ahead and go through with that.
Because I recorded something a while ago with another friend of mine for another podcast, and we got a letter of feedback saying that we pronounced Barsaive wrong. And apparently it was a German listener, and they said it should pronounce Barsaive. And I'm like, no, it's kind of like glaive, A-I-V-E, so Barsaive is how I've always read it. And my brother, the linguist, always said we had it right as well. So he corrected me on a lot of things that I was getting wrong initially, but we're good for now. So we have Barsaive.
Barsaive is how I've always pronounced it, with the emphasis more on the first syllable. I have heard people go Barsaive with more of the emphasis on the second, and that's never sounded quite right for me, but...
No, I'm with you. It's Barsaive. Mm-hmm. Big bar, little save. So Barsaive, Thrall, Thera, those are pretty easy. Iopos.
Yep, that's how I've always pronounced that one.
Yeah, Iopos. Because I looked at like the moon of Io to start with, so I went Iopos. Kratos, also very easy. Vivain. Travar.
Vivain is another slightly tricky one. I've always done it that way with a almost clipped first syllable.
Fair. Travar. Jeris. Is it Urupa?
Urupa with more of an actual like U as the first syllable is how I've always pronounced it. Again, these are like, this is the way that I've always done it, and so take that as you will. If you find the pronunciation for anything that you prefer in your game, go for it. Yeah,
knock yourself. It's your game. Do it the way you want to. Parlength is pretty easy. The AI makes it out there. Then we get to like some of the Tuscarang words. We have the Aropogoi.
Yep.
The Servos jungle.
Yeah, the Servos jungle.
Yeah. Shosara.
Yep.
So this is a new one for me. Prajor's Field.
Prajor's Field is how I've always pronounced it. That is the battle. That's something we'll cover in a later sort of history chapter. It is sort of a significant event.
That one's coming up. Ustrecht. Tuscarang. I got into an argument with somebody about that one. I said it's a capital T with an apostrophe. That makes you stop on that T. It's not a silent T like a silent K in knife. It is a capital T. So
the apostrophe, generally speaking, when you're talking about any words, especially in the Tuscarang language, if there is an apostrophe, it indicates a syllable break, or I think the technical linguistic term for it is a glottal stop.
There you go.
But basically it indicates that you are actually doing a syllable break there. And people tend to go overboard with apostrophes in Tuscarang words or Tuscarang names. Generally speaking, an apostrophe should only come between consonants. It would be replacing what would normally be a vowel sound in between them. The same way that you would have a typical contraction.
I was also able to win the argument because the first edition book, The Serpent River, I believe, actually had a pronunciation guide at the end, and there were 3 names that began with a capital T and an apostrophe, and then another vowel after that, but they actually had the phonetic listed out as TUH for its T.
Yeah, it's just almost basically just like the T sound, and then with a really brief break, and then Tuscarang. So it's 2 syllables.
Yes.
I understand how people might have a little bit of trouble saying that. Scrang, just dropping the T entirely, is the most common version, but Tuscarang is really I think that is official. I think even Lou sort of backs that up as the way it's supposed to be pronounced. So
fair. And I heard a podcast recently, I think you were on it, but somebody actually pronounced the word windling, and I'm like, oh God, no, it's windling, because you are on the wind because you have wings. Yeah, so it is a windling. I listened to that and I said, oh, I want to write a letter so bad.
I don't remember that one. But yes,
I want to say it was episode 3 or 4. Anyway, and then I have a friend who cannot ever say the word obsidian. He knows Spanish. He knows Spanish and he knows English, and for whatever reason, he has to stop and say obsidian men, and I'm like, no, there's no N.
Yeah,
in there.
it's
obsidian.
that is the most common, like, obsidian men, is people want to make it as obsidian because clearly that's where it was derived from, but it's obsidimen, obsidimen.
Yes. Then we have some other ones that are just kind of, I can't say new, but are a little hard to figure out. Like troubadour is actually, I believe, a French word in its foundation. Nethermancer.
Nethermancer, yeah. Neithermancer is okay, but I prefer Nethermancer because
there's no I.
Yeah.
Otherwise it would be neither.
Right.
So it's like from the Netherlands or the nether regions. So Nethermancer. Then there's a couple of French words like etiquette, which people occasionally mispronounce. They want to do etiquette, but it's not. It's etiquette.
It's a hard K sound.
And then this one always got me. My brother corrected me every time, and I finally learned it. Riposte.
Yes.
As a talent. It's not riposte, it's riposte.
Yeah, it's riposte.
It is French.
And yeah, it's I hear people because they're aware of the French, I've seen it pronounced riposte, which is wrong because there's no accent on the E.
Correct.
At least in the Anglicization of the word, it is riposte.
Fair. Another couple of talents I came across or skills. Slough blame. So it's pronounced S-L-U-F-F. Slough.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a slough blame. Alchemy.
Slough is also acceptable for that.
Yeah. Yep. Alchemy, because there's no CH. It's pronounced with a K. So it's not alchemy. It's alchemy. Orichalcum, we discussed earlier.
Those are orichalcum. It derives from Greek. It is actually a Greek word. So the CH is a hard K sound in that.
Yep. Then I found a couple of spells. Ephemeral bolt.
Yep. Ephemeral. It's all sort of short E sounds. It's like ephemera. Is the
and then ethereal darkness.
Ethereal darkness. Ethereal. Wow, that's not anything at all. Ethereal darkness is the way that it is. Yeah, ethereal.
Yeah, there's 4 syllables there. It's a really short word for ethereal darkness. And then netherblade to go along with nethermancer.
As with nethermancer. Yeah.
And then we have, these are the fun ones because these are completely made up. The names of the passions.
Okay, I'm gonna go through these. We've got, and this is how I pronounce them: Estendar, Carolus, again with a hard K sound. Dis.
Gotcha. Yeah, easy.
Dis is easy. Garland.
Yep.
Jasperi.
Okay.
Low cost, again, I do a slightly unusual pronunciation of that potentially, but I feel like it should have the hard K sound in it. As a low cost, I don't like. Low coast, I think going with a more O sound makes it sound better.
Gotcha.
Min Bruges, it's more of a j sound at the end, a softer J. Ragok.
I agree with you on 3 of these so far.
Yeah. Thistonius.
Okay, 4. We're good.
Upandal. Again, more of a short U sound as opposed to Europa, which has more of a U. Upandal. And Vestrial.
Okay, I got 5. I have 5 I agree with you out of 12, so we're doing pretty well. So I always went with Astendar.
Okay.
I did do the CH for Chorolus. I like to roll the R's too, because there's 2 double R's there, and I like to roll my R's. So Chorolus. Disc Garlen, like garden. So just do Garlen, a little softer at the end to make it sound more feminine. Yeah. Jasperi. So I do the
So you're putting more emphasis on the second syllable compared to me.
But I do agree with you on low cost, Min Bruges, Ragok, Thistonius. I do Uppendal.
Okay.
That's all. And then Vestrial. So yeah, that was pretty much it. So that's all.
Yep.
Only places we differ is like on 6 or 7 of them. No big deal. The houses of Thrall.
Those are the.
They're not as common, but
these are not eventually. Actually the list that you've got here. These are not the houses of Thrall. These are the inner cities.
Sorry. Yes. So.
And again, this is sort of the way that I do them. Bethabel, that one I'm not sure of. I
was never either, but I like your second one because I was going with Bethabel as well.
Bethabel, Hustane, O'Shane, Turtaga,
easy.
Valvria, Wishen, with more like less emphasis on the on at the end. Yistane, more emphasis on the first syllable there. Wraithabol and Thurdane, cities that aren't actually populated right now, but they are sort of partially constructed. And then there's the Danat, Dahnat, which is a district of the Great Halls.
Yeah, I agree with you on every one of those. We're good there. Then the Tiskrang houses are my favorites to say. The Ketenshin, the Vestrymen.
Yeah.
Sounds more Russian to me. Sirtis.
Yeah.
The Ishkarat.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip one. The Ticambris.
Ticambris,
Those are all
yeah.
pretty easy. And I always pronounced it Hengyok, but I think last time you said the Henyoke.
Hengyoke is how I have been pronouncing it. For some reason, I feel like it should have the extra syllable on the end. I kind of view the Tiskrang language as, like, I mean, it's its own thing, but I always feel like Tiskrang language should be more like Japanese in terms of its construction. Not that it is based on or derived from Japanese in any way, shape, or form, but just that the Japanese language is syllable based, and a syllable is always pronounced the same way. And so if something is going to show up, like in Hengyoke, that ke at the end would be its own syllable in the same way that it would be if it were sort of a Japanese word. And so that's why. The other thing about the Tiskrang language, and if you kind of look at those are the names of the great houses. Only 3 of them have apostrophes, and they follow the apostrophe rule that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
They very clearly delineate a syllable break between 2 consonants. Also, generally speaking, because of the way that Tiskrang are physically, morphologically, like the way that their mouths and jaws are constructed, I imagine that the Tiskrang language and so forth has a lot of sibilants, a lot of S and hissing sounds, a lot of like K's and T's and stuff that is very easy to make either in the back of the throat or with your tongue against parts of your hard palate.
I agree with that entirely.
I don't think that they tend to, and you can, in general, there are exceptions, but I think there tend to not be as many, I don't know the proper term, but like M and P and sounds where you're like closing the lips around the sound, because I don't think that the Tiskrang mouth quite works that way. I think because of the shape of their face and stuff, I don't think they really have lips the way that most other people do. And so I think that greatly influences the way that their native language and the way that their words are constructed in terms of the sounds. And I also think that it means that a Tiskrang speaking Throlik would have a very distinctive accent. I haven't really quite figured out what that should be, but I think a Tiskrang, even one whose native tongue ostensibly at that point is Throlik, is going to have a somewhat distinctive accent simply because of the way that their mouth parts are made.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely with your evaluation of how that language developed. So on down past that, I just found some words that were in common use and some animals you could possibly buy. So you mentioned earlier the Denerastas clan.
Yeah.
Cool. There are a couple of animals you can go get as well. So you can buy a dire.
Yeah, that one's pretty obvious because it's pretty close to a real word.
Yeah.
Intentionally so, I think.
Yes.
Granlang.
The Granlang, the Hatawa.
Yeah.
The Q.
Q. Yeah, I pronounced like a pool Q, even though it's spelled with a K.
Exactly. Stygian.
Yeah. I generally prefer to pronounce it instead of a long A as a Stygian. I pretend to pronounce it as a Stygian.
Gotcha. Fair enough.
Although I always trip up and I want to put the I before the J rather than after it, and call it a Stygian.
Gotcha. Fair enough. I'm always a little dyslexic as well on that one. Then there's, of course, because I go Stygian and then the Trojan.
Yeah,
so it puts the O and the A before it. So
right, I definitely think that the O and the A should be broken up as separate syllables there, but I tend to put the emphasis more on the first syllable, so Trojan.
Gotcha. Fair.
To give a similar emphasis to Stygian, Trojan.
Yep.
They both get that first syllable emphasis.
And I put these 3 in a row on purpose: the Stygian, the Trojan, and then the Zoic.
Zoke. Yeah, the Zoke. I think because I think is just pronounced as a single word rather than broken up, mainly because of a header like encounter title or something in one of the early adventures where the scene was entitled "Somebody's Idea of a Zoke." Basically going, they're intentionally making that like this rhymes with joke.
So they can. So here's how to pronounce it. We're just going to work this way in there. I don't remember coming across that one. So that
that's I don't remember where. I think it's the name possibly of an adventure seed in the Thrall source book. It might be.
We'll have to go
I don't
look that one
know.
up.
But that's where I decided, it's pronounced Zoke to rhyme with joke because that's the way that makes this thing work best.
No, fair. Like I said, that would have helped me a long time ago. So I defer. Otherwise, every single person I've ever gamed with calls it a thunder beast. And it's not a thundercat.
Thundra.
It's a thundra.
Thundra
D-R-A.
beast.
Thundra
Thundra
beast.
beast.
You have to get that one right. And then, of course, if you play this game long enough, you kind of want to keep track as a game master as to how long your adventures are taking, and months run into one another. So we're going to go to the list of the months real quick. You want to do that?
Sure. We've got Strasa, Veltum, Charasa, Rua, Mawag, Gamil, Raquis, Solus, Riag, Teu, Borum, and Dodal.
I disagree with you on none of those. We're all good. And then there's like 4 or 5 words. I threw one at the end that you don't actually see in your list. But there's a creature you can come across that you can fight called a wyvern. Always wanted to call it a wyvern because it looked like it was cooler that way. But no, it is an old English word called a wyvern. And there's only one pronunciation in the dictionary. I had to go look that one up. I learned. Otherwise, there's 4 names you have to get to know. 3 names. And then one thing regarding orcs. So it's a King Varulus.
Varulus, right? A common misunderstanding is to call him Valorous.
So you replace the L and the R.
Basically flipping the R and the L. And I think there might even be a typo in one of the early promotional things where they actually did have it as Valorous. But it's Varulus. Varul.
It's not like he's full of valor,
right?
Which may be where they got the idea from. So they just swap the R and the L. So Varulus. And then his son, is you Nedin or Nedin?
Nedin. I've always pronounced it with a short E.
Fair. And then there's the race of the offshoots of the Discrang.
The Dingani tribesmen, who are a tribe of humans.
Yes. Gotcha. I'm sorry. The Dingani, and then my favorite one as well is the Orc Gahad.
Gahad.
Yeah, I love the Gahad. It's fun to use.
Yep.
So there it is, our quick 85 keywords on everything in Earth Dawn you want to know how to pronounce. Either Josh's way or my way or your own way. Take your pick and go from there. Anything else we need to bring up real quick because we're gone 80 minutes now.
This is a long one. I think the history ran a little bit longer than we anticipated. So I appreciate people sticking around for this.
But there was a lot to cover. So
yeah, there was a lot to cover, and we had the emails as well there at the beginning. And I think my suggestion of cutting the one segment and saving it for later was a very good one.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. We did not have time for that. We will get to that later.
Yeah, we've got time, but not tonight.
Yeah. So I want to thank Josh for his time,
and I'd like to thank you for continuing to join me on this.
Oh, totally. I'm here by your request. So otherwise, thank you for keeping the light burning for all of us. Please contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep.
Any final words?
Keep building your legends.
There you go, man. We'll see you next time. Legend to follow. The Legend of Lyllaria's Mirror. In the last years before the Scourge, the people of a small village named Lansbourne built a care, as others did, in preparation for the long night. As the world grew darker and more dangerous, the village folk worked harder and harder, faster and faster, fearing they might not finish their care before catastrophe befell them. But despite all their effort, the work went slowly. For Lansbourne was only a small village. The headman of Lansbourne set guards at the approaches to the village, and the guards slew many smaller horrors. Yet still, the village folk did not finish the care. Soon messengers arrived to say that Thrall was closing its great doors, yet still the village folk had not finished their care. And as the world grew darker and more dangerous still, the village folk could only work on the care and pray. On the very day that the care's last stone was laid in place, and the last symbol of protection engraved upon its doors, a ragged band of elves came to the village. They said they had fled from Wormwood, preferring to take their chances in the wild world rather than agree to the mad schemes of their queen. Many of them, they said, had died in the horror-infested land through which they had traveled. Unable to endure any more hardship and danger, and with nowhere else to go, They begged the headman to let them stay. In return for the gift of shelter, the elves offered Landsborn a treasure of great power, Lyllaria's mirror. They said the mirror would warn the care of approaching danger by showing all who looked in it the nature and whereabouts of their enemies. They said they had carried this mirror with them from Wormwood, and that only its power had enabled them to survive their journey. They said that the power of the mirror, wedded to their own magic, would give Caer Landsborn even greater protection against the horrors. All these things they said, and so the headman and the people let them in. 10 years passed, and in those years the horrors attacked Caer Landsborn again and again and again. But the Caer's walls stood strong, and the village folk said that Lyllaria's mirror had saved them. And the elves whispered in the people's ears that gazing into the magical mirror would make them powerful. And so the people went to gaze into it, one by one. And as each of them looked into the smooth glass, the horror hidden within it trapped their minds and enslaved them to its will. And thus, by an act of kindness to strangers, by heeding the artful plea of the wily elves, the village headman had brought Caer Landsborn's doom upon it. The horror, called Mindrender by those who at first escaped it, projected its evil powers through the mirror. The villagers' minds turned to violence, and their magicians ceased to keep up the Caer's defenses, pursuing their own petty quarrels instead. For 20 years, Caer Landsborn ate away at itself, until the protective wards collapsed. But by that time, there was nothing left for the horrors outside to claim. Mindrender had destroyed everyone in the Caer, save a few slaves it kept alive for its awful amusement. When the Scourge ended, some of those slaves escaped Mindrender's weakening grasp and fled into the wilderness. My grandsire was one, and it is for his sake that I tell this dark tale. No one knows for certain what became of Lyllaria's mirror, whether it still lies in the empty rooms of Caer Landsborn, or whether some benighted soul took it from that resting place. For the sake of our world, I pray that it remains within the lost Caer, where the horror within it can trap no more unwary souls.